Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard, and as promised today we're going to be looking at a side-by-side of the Swiss and top 32 of the Americas from the recent Forces from Beyond seasonal tournament. You're not going to be getting any hard-hitting analysis out of me today. The format's already over, the tournament has happened, we're getting a new set tomorrow, so the meta is going to wildly shift. I'm not really trying to dig into the nitty-gritty here and talk about maybe some of the cool lineup swaps that happened, but I more so want to take just an overview of the tournament, kind of put it to bed, and then maybe we'll come back and visit some of this later when the Awakening seasonal happens, when we're looking at historical trends, how players like to play the Swiss rounds, how they like to play the top 32, and try to metagame it a little bit in that coming Tournament Tactician a couple of months down the road in October when that seasonal actually happens. So the first thing that I want to note is that from Swiss to the top 32, no player changed all three of their decks. 6 players changed 2 of their decks, and another 6 players changed a single one of their decks. So we have 12 players swapping their lineups in some capacity, and we have 20 players just running back what they did in Swiss, and that's kind of why it's so important that the names of the players are not revealed until it's time for the lock-in, so you can't go and look at what your opponent was playing and things like that, because most players just are not swapping off of their lineups, and I don't think you necessarily had to in a meta like Kai'Sa. It's a little surprising to me that there was such a small drop-off in Kai'Sa from the Swiss to the top 32, but this is very similar to what we saw with Winding Light, where it was another very large gap between that number 1 and that number 2 deck. It seemed very targetable, and yet it still won the seasonal, right? Kai'Sa won the seasonal this time with 4LW, Trevo won with Winding Light the set before. I think A Curious Journey was the last time where we didn't have the top deck sort of winning, as Prodigy came in with triple Shurima, and it was more of an Aphelios and Pantheon-centric seasonal where Pantheon really didn't have a big fall off from Swiss to top 32, but Aphelios certainly took a nosedive. But that was a bit of an outlier. Even just looking at the other seasonals that we've had this year, that one was a little bit weird. So with Worldwalker and Forces from Beyond going the same way, if Awakening does turn out to be another expected meta like this, where we've got that one deck that's just a cut above the rest, and maybe it's not even this drastic of a fall off from the number 1 to the number 2 deck, and it does catch up a little bit when we get into the top 32, as players kind of, look at the Swiss list that they played, what they were hyped for going into the Swiss rounds that they then got to play 9 rounds with, and decided, hey, maybe this isn't really what I wanted. And I think Red Gwen was a good example of that, where it goes from like our number 4 deck down to like our number 6 deck as players swap over to Pirates in a larger capacity, as well as Nasus, as they sort of figure out that this targets Kai'Sa. And then Ezreal Kennen actually doubled in play rate from Swiss to top cut as well. So players definitely came in to target the Kai'Sa, and there were certainly enough to target, and it still just really wasn't a winning strategy. And then you get some players that you really can't reason with. They play their lineup and they like it, and if you look at it, maybe it doesn't make the most sense in the world, but it got them this far, and they're not going to think about it too hard. They're going to run back success. A good example of this being Kid with the Pig, who ran Frostbite Foundry, Shellfolk, and Akshan Infinite combo in Swiss. A lineup that I don't think anybody was writing articles about was really on anybody's radar, was whispering to their friends, okay, I found the secret lineup, it's this, and just decided to run it back for the top 32. I don't know anything about Kid with the Pig. I'd like to keep my finger on the pulse of the grassroots scene. Maybe they're more of a ladder player. They did finish with 8-1. They finished with an 8-1 record in Swiss, so like it's kind of hard to tell, if they had ladder seeding, if this is like a ladder player that I've never heard of. If like I'm gonna put out this video and everyone's gonna be like, I can't believe you've never heard of Kid with the Pig. What are you talking about? He's been ruining Masters ladder with Akshan combo and Shellfolk. I don't think that's really the case, but like there are just some players that are hard to read. It's kind of the point that I'm getting at here. And if this lineup had won the seasonal, yeah, we'd be talking about it more, but it didn't. Instead, we're focusing more on like, the Kai'Sa and just sort of the minimal fall off of the best deck, the fact that the best deck is still winning the seasonal every time. So we look at 4LW's winning lineup of Red Gwen, TF Nami, and Kai'Sa, Sivir, J4, which like I counted this as no decks changed from Swiss to top cut for 4LW, just because changing out an Akshan for a Jarvan the 4th doesn't really feel like a totally different deck, especially because I don't know the rate at which 4LW drew said Jarvan. I don't remember seeing it at all in the finals, so it's possible that this swap just had absolutely no impact on the tournament, and 4LW just never drew that one of Jarvan. It didn't really matter. But like TF Nami, Red Gwen, Kai'Sa, I don't think was a lineup that a lot of people were expecting. It doesn't explicitly counter Kai'Sa in the way that some of the other lineups were doing, kind of like Pirates, Kai'Sa, Kindred Nasus, like we saw out of Cup is Mine, the runner-up. Instead, I think 4LW just kind of came in and did what 4LW does, which is skill gap people. You know, when you make it to the top 32, that doesn't automatically make you one of the 32 best players on the planet. You still have a capacity to misplay, and we see them quite frequently in the top 32. And it's because Legends of Runeterra is a pretty hard game to play perfectly. And sometimes you run hot on the day, and sometimes you don't. But 4LW definitely came in with a lineup that really wasn't kind of what I expected when we were talking about things that were going to win the tournament. Like, TF Nami's been on my radar for a while, but I didn't really think it was going to be a breakout star of the seasonal specifically, where, you know, obviously it was doing some okay things. It was doing moderately well into Kaisa, especially post-nerf, but it really, like, it's kind of hard to talk about the low presence decks that you expect to see the seasonal. Like, Eviego I didn't think was going to win the seasonal, and actually I'm very surprised to see this climb from Swiss to top 32. It's weird to me. Scouts fell off a cliff if we're just kind of looking for other things to talk about. I think, yeah, Poppy Tarek fell off a cliff in general. Like, the Demacia fell off a cliff in general, and that's not too surprising. I think that Demacia is a very safe Swiss lineup where you get to play these proactive strategies. You know, you've kind of got game into everything because you can just curve out and run people over. But as you get into the top 32, this becomes less appealing, and I think that, like, the Scouts Poppy Tarek lineup just didn't do what people wanted it to do. Maybe you came in and you were like, yeah, I'm not going to ban Kaisa because I'm on Scouts, Poppy Tarek, Kaisa. And then, like, you lose round 1 to Kaisa and you're like, all right, time to change up the ban strategy. You go 8 more rounds, it works out, you top cut. I don't really have a great explanation as for the fall off of Scouts and Poppy Tarek, but I think it was just like, you have to sacrifice something if you want to come in for some of the safer counter picks on Kaisa. And this is something we're going to have to look towards on the next season as well. Now, I'm really hoping that Awakening doesn't give us the split that we've had for World Walker and Forces from Beyond, where we've got that one deck that is just, you know, a cut above everything else. Like, if we check over here at World Walker, you know, Winding Light 22 down to 19, some up on a couple of the counter picks. Actually, not really. The numbers really fluctuated in the lower ends here. But going back as far as, like, Curious Journey, because this is the last time we didn't have the massive gap, right? We had Aphelios and Pantheon Yumi. Ziggs Talia came in at number 3. That was pretty expected. But then we get to the top 32, and all of a sudden there's this massive flip where Pantheon Yumi gains a bunch of points to become the number 1 deck. Aphelios falls down to number 5. Like, this is not the standard for what we look at in seasonals, but I'm really hoping that we can get back to a meta like this, because I think it was more exciting. Granted, I don't love watching Sundisk and Ziggs Talia and Viego Shurima, and I didn't really love how heavy into Shurima the meta was, but I think that this, in terms of, like, deck representation, I'm really hoping for something like this more than World Walker and Forces from Beyond. But that is a bit of an outlier, right? Because, again, we look at Magic Misadventure, the seasonal before that, and again, we've just got the one deck that's clearly running the format. That goes down to a drastic drop-off into the number 2 deck. Again, number 1 deck falls off a little bit as we go into Top Cut. Players switch things around a little bit. The counter picks start to come up a little bit higher. Bandle Tree, this was like a crazy sort of jump. I think there was 1 Bandle Tree in the Swiss rounds, but that's really neither here nor there in terms of the overall representation of just talking about, like, we've had a lot of one-deck dominated metas, and it would suffice to say that I would expect Awakening to look similar, because I don't have a great reason not to. Curious Journey, I think, was a bit of a fluke. And even when we look at the top 32, like, again, you get this one deck that is clearly better than the others, this massive drop-off from number 1 to number 2. And maybe we should have had a Swiss that was similar to that. But I gotta say, the game, like, if you look at the historical seasonal trends, the meta game looks pretty unhealthy. Right? We shouldn't be having a number 1 deck that is twice as represented as the number 2 deck. Curious Journey, we get that in Top Cut. World Walker, not quite double, but not too far off. And then Forces from Beyond, closer to triple than double. You know what I mean? So what we're going to be trying to do when Awakening drops is figure out what this is, right? Figure out what that best deck is that's going to absolutely run the game, because some of the champions are looking rather strong. And, yeah, it's just like when we start gearing up for the seasonal. Now, I don't know how long we have from the Awakening seasonal patch to the Awakening seasonal. I'm really hoping it's longer than a week and a half this time, because the crunch time on this was just really hard for me to try to do any kind of digging and analysis. So I'm hoping we get a little, 2.5 weeks I'd be fine with. 1.5 weeks was just not enough, but yeah, we're really hoping that last seasonal can kind of end the year strong, because so far the 3 that we've had count for this upcoming World Championship have been looking not great. But yeah, that's, I just kind of wanted to show you the breakdowns, Nothing too exciting. Like, this is pretty standard stuff, right? We have a best deck, we up the counter picks, down the best deck in top cut, and then the best deck still wins. It's kind of how it goes. Anyway, that is going to do it for me for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will be back tomorrow with some gameplay footage from the opening day of Awakening, because we're trying to put out 5 YouTube videos a week now, so that's cool. So get ready for that, and then, of course, Tournament Tactician on Friday, where I'll try to prep you for the opening weekend. If there, as far as I know, there are no tournaments, but that may change. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. My name is Boulevard, and as always, good luck in your tournaments.